This is OPI SQL Server Part 3, Stored Procedures and OPENROWSET. Please subscribe to this channel and like the videos. In production work, we don't want to use SSMS manually for the operations shown. Instead, we want to create procedures for what we've just done so that we get consistent results. Automation prevents many errors. Now we're going to cover two ways of using Excel connections with embedded SQL to set up PowerOPI and to query tables within the project. One way will use linked servers as shown so far, and another way uses a function called OPENROWSET. First, we'll describe using linked servers. Before we can query, we need to set up the linked servers needed. We're going to do that programmatically now. Reminder, there's one linked server per workbook file used in the project. Each is identified by its name, which is related to the name of the linked file. When we go to set up a linked server, there could be one in place already. We're going to replace it with a linked server by the same name and with the configuration we're expecting. Perhaps the linked file path has changed, for example. We're going to need 3 connections to set up a linked server. A connection with embedded SQL to drop the existing linked server by that name if there is one. Then we need a connection to create a stored procedure creating a new linked server by that name. While we're at it, we'll configure the ODBC driver to be sure of its configuration. Finally, we need a connection to execute the stored procedure to create the linked server. We could just embed SQL to drop the linked server and then create the replacement, but if we leave stored procedures in place, we can just execute them if that's needed in the future. Embedded SQL for each of these 3 connections is shown on this page and highlighted. In the first connection, a one-liner drops the SP named procedure name if it exists. In the second connection, a SQL procedure creates a stored procedure to configure ODBC and then create the linked server. The form of the embedded SQL is create procedure, procedure name, as begin, then SQL implementing the SP, then end, semicolon. The procedure name, of course, is the same as the procedure name dropped by the first SP. The SQL code is like that shown earlier to run SSMS, but without use or go, which only affects the SSMS editor anyway. The third connection shown embeds SQL to exec the SP to create the linked server. These 3 connections will be created, and each is refreshed in Excel to execute them sequentially from VBA when PowerOPI workbook connections are initialized. That VBA is shown in the relinking video, which will be provided on this channel and is available from the SoftToy software website. You could create these 3 connections manually as shown or using VBA. Then when executing the connections in VBA, reconfigure the names in SQL in each before refreshing it to execute the SQL. Then you wouldn't need several connections for each of several workbooks. If you use VBA to set up and execute these connections, you'll find it would be helpful to use structured tables to contain SQL that can be configured using Excel. And it would be nice to use structured references as you would in the Excel user interface. Excel supports structured tables in the object model, but doesn't directly support structured references. But there will be a video on this channel showing how to use structured references in VBA, giving you all the power needed. So now we have SPs set up to create and configure linked servers that we need in order to query data. Next, we need SPs to do the data queries. Here's the SQL again to query linked tables using linked servers. It's the same as we saw earlier to embed in a connection to execute the query. This SQL will be embedded into an SP that queries the Excel tables using the linked server set up in the previous SPs. Earlier, we discussed the 4-part naming used to query using a linked server. Now we set up a stored procedure containing the SQL to query the tables in the Excel workbooks. Again, we need 3 connections. SQL for each of these connections is shown on this slide. One connection drops any pre-existing SP with the chosen name. Notice how we're naming and referring to SPs. Prefix the chosen name by DBO. Which puts it in the domain of database owner, which is you. First listing on the slide shows one-liner SQL for this connection to drop a pre-existing SP. The second connection to create the SP that will contain the SQL to query the linked server. Second listing shows SQL for this connection. Create procedure name as begin, query, end, semicolon, containing the SQL query. This creates the SP containing the data query. And third connection, embedding one line of SQL to exec the SP containing the data query SQL. Name the connection including its function exec and something descriptive of the query like abdbe. This connection execs the data query SP and will be used to drive pivots or tables designed to use the result of the data query SQL, which is most of them. When you set up a pivot that should be driven by this data query SQL, choose this exec connection to drive the pivot via Excel ribbon Insert, Pivot Table, Create Pivot Table. Pane opens, select Use an External Data Source, and click the button Choose Connection, and choose this exec connection from the Existing Connections dialog box. All pivots that use the result of the data query SQL embedded in this SP can use this connection as their source to return the result of the data query SQL in the SP. An added benefit is that the file structure of the linked source tables and the query syntax are contained in SPs and not in each client workbook, so these structures can be maintained in one place. This also provides some security by hiding the structure and not distributing it. So far, we've used linked servers to query tables in Excel. There's another way that's useful that uses a SQL function called OPENROWSET. Each query is self-contained and doesn't need overhead to set up a linked server. Each query is more complex, but may simplify solution logic that requires setup steps. The query select and join structure remains the same as for using linked servers, but the references to the linked servers and the four-part naming used to reference the table ranges are each replaced by a call to OPENROWSET. Each call to OPENROWSET contains the fully qualified Windows path to the Excel file containing the tables, and notice the last parameter specifies the named range in the Excel workbook, representing the structured table. Again, only Excel named ranges can be seen, so the Excel workbooks must install the linking VBA to each worksheet containing structured tables. All the elements of the prior examples using linked servers are shown with replacement by OPENROWSET in the SQL code shown on this page. Again, you use 3 connections to use this SQL. The same first connection embedding SQL to drop any pre-existing SP named containing this code. A new connection embedding this OPENROWSET SQL to create an SP containing this code. The same third connection embedding SQL to exec the SP containing this code. This connection, as before, is chosen in the Pivot Setup dialog to drive pivots in Excel. This structure again hides the file structure and query structure, avoiding distribution of structure to client workbooks. This structure also eliminates the need to set up linked servers prior to executing a data query. OPENROWSET can also bulk load a table in SQL Server from an external source. There are reference links on my website at softtoysoftware.com. The OPI SQL Server sequence continues in OPI SQL Server Part 4, Access and Power Query. Please subscribe to this channel and like the videos.